I hope you're all doing well. I had a request a long time ago to please show how the ejector extractor works on the double rifle and on the Hagen single shot. But before I get into that, I just wanted to comment. I received a message from Brett in Australia. First off, welcome to Patreon, Brett. And your project sounds actually excellent. The 8x68S is one of my favorite rounds. It's not that well known over here, but it's superb. And that Zastava action that you're going to use for your custom build African rifle is a great choice. And feel free to send over your phone number and I'll give you a call and we can talk about the project. There are different ways to go with stocking and a rifle like that. And again, I don't know whether you're planning, to have a scope or offhand shots, but please feel free to get in touch and I'll call you back. So regarding the people that were asking me about the falling block system, I'll just make some general comments. As you know, I was involved in designing the falling block double. Real learning experience. I learned that I know even less than I thought I knew, and I didn't think I knew much in the first place. There's not much room in a falling block action, and you don't want to add too many hangers, you don't want to add steel, because then you defeat the purpose of the falling block, which is to have a compact, dynamic, lightweight rifle. In some ways, the falling block No.1, which is disassembled in front of me, or partly disassembled, was a success. I'm happy with the outcome. It's a beautiful rifle. But I can see where mistakes were made. Not that the design is faulty, it works perfectly, but things could have been improved. But you just can't outthink the mechanics of things. In reality, everything works out a little differently than one expects, just like in life. Anyhow, this is falling block No.1, and this is the miniature action. Now, I think maybe you've watched the main channel, and I've probably owned every falling block that there ever was made, and Hagen is easily the best. A few concepts that I think are worth mentioning is inline ignition. There's no point building a falling block that has a firing pin at this angle, and a lot of the British falling blocks do exactly that, because it's hard to create the alignment of parts when the stock recedes from the line of ignition, which is up here. The Hagen accomplishes inline ignition by means of this shrouded action spring. And if I lose you, you'll have to bear with me. I know it's not going to be an easy video for me or for you, but we'll cock the action, and you can see how the mechanical functions here are actually in some ways the reverse of what one would expect. But again, I don't want to get into too many details, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it won't work. It actually, in this particular case, works better than any other falling block system. So there's a spring in this shroud that you can't see. It's quite a strong spring, and that pre-tensions the block. So there's no, if I shake this, there's no feeling of a mousetrap. That's the best way I can describe a lot of these, the old English falling blocks. That isn't to take away from them. They were. It was amazing that they got them to work. But there are springs and countervailing springs and pins and so on. There aren't any pins available, visible on the Hagen. Anyhow, then you close the action, and now this piece here, you may or may not be able to see it clearly, is the sear that captures the tension of the spring. And really, I remember discussing this with Martin a few times, this ideally would just be a striker. I mean, this spring is more than strong enough to impact the primer on its own. But how could we get the reach of the spring to the ignition line? That was the problem. So there's a hammer in here which you can't see, and ideally there would just be a striker, as everybody who looks at Glocks knows. Anyway, we'll fire this. This doesn't hurt the firing pin, you'll see it. So we'll do that a couple of times so you can run it at slow motion. Again, I apologize in advance for my poor technical filming stuff, but anyway, here we go. So the reason I took apart the mini action, this is in 223. I'll do it one more time, mainly to show you the simplicity of this design. There's a roller safety up here. I probably should go over what I took off. So this is the stock, the butt stock, and it has shadow line cheek piece. And then this is the fore end. And this one is a bit of a, not really heavy, but medium heavy kind of beaver tail fore end. And it is attached directly to the barrel. And I know that people say everything should be free floating, but by now you know I've owned many firearms, many rifles, and I've never been able to detect much of a difference. There's a quarter rib and then a banded front sight, and these things were all made by hand. This isn't from any manufacturer. Martin makes them from scratch. Beautiful little action. So bearing that in mind, how that works, we tackled it. Now this goes back, I don't know, 15 years at least. The double rifle. A double rifle, it's not twice the challenge. It's like 4 times the challenge, or maybe even 8 times the challenge, for reasons which we learned as we went along. And I have this falling block double rifle from Vienna. It was made by a guy named Koletsky. Beautifully made rifle. I didn't want to have it on the table because it's going to add another dimension of complexity. But you've got the basic concepts that we wanted to preserve. We wanted inline ignition. There's nothing wrong with the Hagen system. It's fine. So we need to capture that in a compact action housing. We wanted to have it properly engraved, and the fitting and finishing I wasn't worried about. That's a function of time and investment, which I was prepared to make. And you can see that the falling block double is not that much bigger than in the action side plates anyway, than the mini action. So I'll just proceed with what some of you wanted to know, was how did we accomplish an ejector in the single shot. The idea was a lot easier to handle because it's only one shell, and you can use an existing extractor and give it a kick. But again, I'll probably get off track if I go into that. The falling block double, major challenge. So we've got a hanger in the front, and actually I'll make it real simple. This part, I took the pins out. Now when you take the pin out, the falling block can be removed and the action won't work. So I put a false pin. In this case I just used a screw, a machine screw, to hold this mechanism in place so that I could talk about it. I removed the crossbolt, which is just threaded in from the other side, and then Martin made this tool so that it's easy to take off, because theoretically this could have gone into production. I ran out of time. These are difficult to make. They can be improved, and it could go into production still one day, but there are, lots easier ways of making money, so you kind of go with what makes sense. Anyway, these two pieces comprise the extractor and ejector, actually just the ejector. In order to eject something, you have to hit it with some kind of force, essentially a hammer, and this is the hammer right here. Now these two pieces actually go into the action underneath. So I took them out to show you how they work, because once I put them in, you can't see them. You won't be able to see how they work. Now this is spring tension. This thing here, I just put this here to hold the essentially split hammer housing So this falls back, and there are some other components. This is the spring that drives this hammer, and this hammer, I'm going to show you in a second. I have the bolt out of the barrels so I can remove the barrels and show you in a second. But that's the action, and there's a link pin, a link. Martin uses links in his designs, and there was another one, and then there are other parts here, but that'll just cloud the issue. So what we'll do is we'll go to the barrels, and you can see in some ways it's like a conventional tipping action. This goes into that hole, and here we have the extractor, and I actually took out the ejector just because this spring is so powerful. It throws the empties a long ways. Now I'm going to try to hold that steady so we can focus in. So this piece moves out, and I'm going to contradict myself and try to move that out for you, which I usually use this pin to accomplish. So there you can see that's the extractor, and it turns into an ejector, and I'll show you how in a second. And if you notice these little odd pins, that's because I wanted to be able to shoot 7x57R, which requires no pins, or 7x57. So those two tiny pins, I don't know if you can make them out. You probably maybe can't, but they fit into the rimless cartridge of regular 7x57. So that's how that was accomplished. It works perfectly. And now naturally this piece is just moving when it's operated without the ejector, but when it's hit by the ejector it moves aggressively and kicks those cases out. And here's where the hammer that I showed you in the first place fits. It pivots into this recess, so I'm not sure how to show that. It pivots in here, and now I'll set this down, and this is the piece that actually kicks the cartridges out right here. This is the pivot. Now in order to get this all to work, I guarantee you is not an easy process. Now you can picture, I'm not sure I want to take this out, but I'll do it anyway. So if I tried to lower this now, this action will come undone. Hopefully it won't though. And you can see how this piece is finished. This I just taped on, so we can remove that. So that sits here and it sits inside there. And that's how it works. I hope that's sufficient. It's a good question to ask. Now I'm going to put my false pin back in so that we don't have anything weird happening. And now I can show you exactly like the small action. So to get this all to work was not easy. And you'll see how the springs work. And you have an operating falling block double. Now this fake pin will capture the pressure. It takes significant pressure because I have no barrels, nothing to hang on to. Maybe you want to watch that from the front. I hope that pin doesn't fall out. So you can see the action rising here. The block rises, and it has bushed firing pins. I'll set this here. Those are bushings on the firing pins. The whole action is color case hardened, and the tolerances are a lot finer than any factory, but you can accomplish that with handwork. You can't set a machine for these kinds of tolerances. The machines won't work. That's not boasting. I'm just saying that when you have someone who knows what they're doing build something by hand, you can accomplish something like this. And bear in mind, this was kind of dark territory. This was serial number 1, so we didn't know what was going to happen. And everything, that we came up with was the way we expected. It's just when I spend time with it, I can see where there were things that could have been done. You can see what I did is I closed it without caulking it to show you that function. It does everything that any of the British falling blocks did, and I can't even remember whether I showed you the buttstock. That's, you know, it's the typical Turkish walnut, beautifully made. That's all, I think, first class. That's the butt plate, and Martin checkered it. And then the retainer for the fore end, we wanted it theoretically to have different types of barrel sets, and so we used this screw system. You just flip this out and it pops off, and then take this cross bolt out. You pivot your barrels off, and these are Holland and Holland barrels, by the way. And yeah, so there it is. I thought that's worth sharing with you. I lost track of the number of hours that were spent. Again, you know, when you're working on something like this, different things happen, and not being a gun maker, one of the puzzles was actually making the barrels themselves. Now in this case we ended up using these Holland and Holland barrels, but nothing else, just the barrel. And then, you know, how to get it regulated and things like that. But I did come up with a unique way of boring holes, boring two parallel holes, which I can send you. It's not patented or anything, but it's, you know, interesting design. Well, I didn't think it was going to be an easy video to make in the first place, but I hope you saw something of what I was up to and Martin was up to with this. It's like I keep repeating myself, awful lot of time. Very cool scope mounting system. You just push this button and the scope pivots up. I like these old Kala scopes. They were very bright. It's a steel scope. So a little bit disorganized. I apologize for that, but I wish there was a way to have a transparent action, because if you saw how this works, and we didn't have any computer assistance at all, this was just thinking, and you can see the block has risen higher than the action here. That's now back in place. There are block stops inside, but you can't see the block stops, but this is slightly smaller than the hole, so the block stops are a little bit off anyway. It's a lot like chess. Designing one of these, everything affects something else, and when you're working in steel especially, it's not a forgiving material. But for fun, we'll do that one more time, and you can watch this thing, how those pivot. I mean, if you didn't have to use the inline system, these would be totally effective strikers. And I thought a long time, how can we get the block lower? Or how can we get this higher? Because strikers are better than hammers. There's a delay. In the Ruger No.1, there's a long delay. You kind of pull the trigger and wait for the firing pin to be hit. Anyway, that's it for today, and I hope that's meaningful to you. And thank you for being here. And we'll see you on the next video. Take care.